Hello and welcome back to the Consistory of the Coelc. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia, a member congregation of the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion, or COELC for short. Welcome back to my series, Australian Lutheran Synods, where I'm going through the different Lutheran synods and independent congregations here in Australia and looking at their teachings and what makes them different to one another. These videos are aimed at being informative and helping people make a decision as to which church they should belong to. Now, in these videos, I'm not going to argue doctrinal points and try and put forth my synod's position and why my church's position is right and everyone else is wrong. This is meant to be more of an objective. This is what this group teaches and this is what this group teaches, so that you can make an informed decision as to which group you would like to belong to. If you'd like to actually watch in-depth episodes about the issue at hand, generally I have done videos on these topics which you can view on this channel. Today we're looking at the topic of lay consecration, and I have done videos on this topic, both an Ask the Consistory one where I talk to camera like this, and also one of my little Luther videos where I explain the topic using my little animated little Luther character. And so in this video we're discussing the practice of lay consecration, whether or not a lay person can, in the absence of a clergy, consecrate the sacraments. Now, one thing I want to specify before we begin is that the churches that reject lay consecration, all of them, with the exception of maybe the coelc-atc church, they reject it on the grounds of authority, not on the grounds of validity. What I mean by that is they would say that an element consecrated by a layperson would still be valid communion, it would be the real presence, it would be the body and blood of Jesus, and it would give the forgiveness of sins. However, it is not right to do so. As the Lutheran theologian C.F.W. Walther said in his Pastoral Theology regarding lay consecration, it is never correct or legitimate, however, it is still valid and in fact. And most Lutherans that reject lay consecration reject it on authoritative grounds, not validity grounds. So if they reject it, they say, we reject this because this is improper, it violates the idea of Article 14 of the Augsburg Confession that nobody should administer the sacraments without a right call, and so only ministers should administer sacrament, but we would still believe that it is a valid sacrament. The only exception to this would possibly be the coelc-atc group, which do seem to take a more hard line on this stance. Now, I am not sure whether the coelc-atc group does reject the validity of the sacrament consecrated by a layman, but they would be the only exception if they do reject it. Now, let us then turn to my chart and discuss which churches allow lay consecration and which don't. So, firstly, the main church in Australia, the Lutheran Church of Australia, rejects lay consecration, although they do make an exception where they do have a kind of temporary ordination process. So, this was like something that was debated in Missouri Synod back in 2017, this practice of a licensed lay deacon, in which they reject lay consecration in principle. No lay person can just get up and consecrate it, but they do from time to time issue kind of temporary ordinations to individuals that would allow them to consecrate the elements in the absence of a regular pastor. So the LCA does, at least in principle, reject lay consecration, but they then kind of get around it by giving these temporary appointed lay people the ability to consecrate the elements in the absence of a regular pastor. And this was something that was rejected by the Missouri Synod back in 2017. Now, as for churches that do allow lay consecration, groups like the ELCR, the ELSA, which is the Wells, and the OELC, also the Independents that broke away from the AELC, the CLC, they all allow lay consecration. Here is actually something important to understand, because there has been this historical division between the Missouri Synod and the Wisconsin Synod regarding what is the office of the ministry. And this is something I've tried to explain to people on social media, that these church divisions are not minor issues. They are often major issues. Sure, they may manifest as minor liturgical differences, but they stem from major theological differences. The Wisconsin Synod and the Missouri Synod have very different views on what the office of the ministry is and who exercises the office of the keys. In short, Missouri sees the office of the ministry as something separate from the priesthood of believers, and that the clergy are the ones given the authority by God to administer the sacrament, whereas the Wisconsin sees the office of the ministry as an extension of the priesthood of all believers, and that simply for the sake of good order do the ministers administer the word and sacraments. But any Christian can get up and do that when there is not a pastor present. So you can see this is a major difference between those two understandings of the office of the ministry. And so you'll see this in Australia, those who have a more Missourian understanding of the ministry and those who have a more Wisconsin view of the ministry. And so churches like the ELCR, the ELSA, the OELC, and the Independents and the CLC, they all follow that more Wisconsin view of the office of the ministry, which says the clergy are just there for the sake of good order. Anybody can get up and administer a word and sacrament. Whereas groups like the AELC, the GLN, the St. Jude congregation, the St. Peter's congregation, and the COELC follow a more Missourian view of the office of the ministry, and we say no, the office of the ministry is something distinct from the priesthood of believers, and only the clergy should administer the sacraments. Now, the Aldona Casia in Australia have a very similar view. They also reject lay consecration, but they have a much more kind of sacerdotalist view when it comes to the office of the ministry, where it is only the clergy who can actually bring about the validity of the sacrament, which is why I believe Aldona and Casia would reject lay consecration on the grounds that a lay consecrated sacrament would be an invalid sacrament. There is also one other group that I've not mentioned yet amongst the conservative groups, and this is the Allies or Aletheia group, started by Chris Roseborough of the AALC and Pastor Joel Klein here in Australia. And on my chart, I have them down as a yes on lay consecration. However, there is a footnote which specifies that Aletheia only permits their vicars as kind of these pastors in training to consecrate the elements. However, the Aletheia Church, like other Missouri churches, see vicars not as clergy but as laity. Thus, this would be a form of lay consecration. So Aletheia, like the LCA, in principle rejects lay consecration, but then has ways around it which then allows them to have lay people consecrate the elements. New confessional Lutheran group in Australia, the LMA, also rejects lay consecration on similar grounds to the COELC and the AELC. We reject it on authority grounds, not on validity grounds. As for churches that do openly just allow for lay consecration, we have the LCMC in Wagga Wagga, Edgar Mayer's Living Grace in Toowoomba, and the Living Waters Pentecostal Church in Mildura. All of them also allow lay consecration as well. Those are the list of churches that allow or don't allow lay consecration. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.